Welcome, guys, and today we'll be having a online case discussion. So, who is presenting today? Mrinal?
Yes, sir.
Tell everybody to turn on their microphones so that they can answer whenever they are asked.
Okay, sir.
And who is presenting?
That's
So, have you decided who is presenting?
no, sir. Sir, uh, you can select randomly, sir.
Okay. So, Mrinal, I can hear only your voice. So, why don't we start with you? Next time we can ask somebody else to present. So, what's the
Okay,
case?
sir.
So first you talk about the chief complaints and you know how to present the history, chief complaints, then history of present illness, then past medical history, then other
Okay, sir.
histories, है ना? And it's
Yes, sir.
going to be a friendly discussion, no problems. And how do I get rid of this main screen? Do you have a PowerPoint to share or anything?
Uh, no, sir.
ठीक है ऐसे चलो. We'll continue like this only.
Sir, present. Sir, 1 minute, sir.
So whenever you present history, first of all, what you have to remember is you have to be very calm, okay, and very relaxed. Otherwise, you will make mistakes. You will not be able to recall. And like I always say in my classes, like just stay grounded and start with the chief complaints in a chronological order, and we'll reach to a diagnosis conclusion. So, how do you
Okay, sir.
start the history when you
Sir,
start presenting the history?
presenting a case of 50-year-old male who presented with the chief complaint of swelling of legs since 1 month
No,
in
that's not
distant.
the way to start, Mrinal. So you have to tell me who is the informant. Is the informant the patient himself, or is it some relative? And are they related to each other? Do they stay together? Does the informant know about the patient? So these things are very important. And
Yes,
you
sir.
have to tell me about the ID mark of the patient, because you must always remember any patient or any file which is not a medical legal file today can become a medical legal file tomorrow. So your paperwork has to be complete, and you should be able to identify the patient in the court. Supposing God forbid something happens after 10 years also, you should be able to identify the patient based on the identification mark, some scar, some mole which will not vanish tomorrow, which will stay there. Okay, so that is
Okay,
very
sir.
important. So what is ID mark?
Sir, starting from beginning, sir. A 50-year-old male named Rajesh, a resident of Golgar,
Mm-hmm.
a teacher by occupation.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so then identification mark, I have to mention it here.
Mm-hmm.
Then he has a pin-sized mole in just below the right eyebrow.
Okay. So what is the
Uh,
dimension of the mole? Uh,
it's a
what millimeter by what?
pinhead-sized black mole, sir.
Inner side black mole. Okay, fine.
Then he came to the medicine OPD with the chief complaint of swelling of legs since
And
1 month
who is the
and
informant?
distant.
Who is the informant?
The patient itself is the informant.
Okay, why is this important?
So reliability of
Uh,
the
Muskan,
information that the patient gives.
Muskan, why is this important? Priyanka, anybody can switch on their mic and answer. There's no problem. And I'm opening the chat window also. In the chat window also, you people can answer. No issues. Feel free. So see, history presentation is a give and take. Okay, you have to say something on which I will build up, and I will be able to say something. So you have to give the feed in. So you have to say something. I just can't take a lecture during the case presentation. Mrinal, you tell me. What is the importance of the informant? Like, who is the informant? Now, you said this patient will come to the chief complaint after this, because sometimes the patient comes with altered sensorium. Sometimes the patient comes with the history of suicidal tendencies, or he might come with ingestion of some poisonous substance. So in that case, you have to take the history with a pinch of salt. Okay, so you take the patient's history, but you also make your own conclusions, because let's say a patient came to you with the history of ingestion of 5 tablets of alprazolam, and patient gives you this history. She is feeling dizzy, and after taking these tablets, and she made a mistake. But this same patient might have taken 30 tablets of Alprax. She might have taken 30 tablets of something, some beta blocker or some other fatal medication in fatal dose. So you cannot trust the patient. Just if you think the patient has taken just 5 tablets of Alprax, she will just wake up after some time. But if the patient has tried to put an end to her life, she might lie also in the history. Okay, so this is very important. So you have to choose what the patient says. You have to decide whether to buy it or not, and you verify with the relatives and other people. And sometimes the other scenario is the person who is standing by the bedside of the patient. He might be the person responsible for the misery of the patient. Okay, so the patient might not talk in front of the relative who is standing by her bedside. Maybe it is her husband, or maybe it is his wife. So then you always should take the history in detail. If it's a female patient, with consent, you keep a staff or some female doctor with you, and then you take the history. But there should be nobody else around, because if the person who from because of whom the patient is suffering, if he's standing by the bedside, they may not open up. Okay, now proceed with the chief complaint. What is the importance of age?
Age, sir. Certain diseases affect the particular age, sir.
Like
neonatal diseases occurs in children, and chronic diseases occurs in like non-communicable
so what are the
diseases
diseases
occurs in
that
old
occur
age.
in adult age after
So
40 years, 35 years?
diabetes,
Okay.
the
Uh-huh.
non-communicable diseases like stroke, diabetes,
Uh-huh.
hypertension.
No, they can develop communicable diseases also. COVID, HIV, and they are all so you can develop any type of disease, but there are certain diseases which usually occur in particular age group. So like asthma. Asthma will be the onset usually is before 20 years of age, isn't it? COPD. The onset is usually after 30 years, 35 years. Then the patient start presenting with COPD. And likewise in adult onset diseases, diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, obesity, although these days you see obesity cases in children also. So age wise it is very important. Sex wise, certain diseases will present in one sex, okay, like hemophilia. So everything is important, age and ethnicity. So this patient is from which place?
Sir, from Port Blair itself, sir.
So this patient is from Port Blair. So before even diving into the problem, so tell me some diseases which are prevalent in Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
Sir, malaria.
Malaria very rarely we see. Okay, it is there. Snake bites. Okay, so because it is a green area, and at least 2 or 3 patients we get to see on our on-call days snake bites, and they can come with swelling of the feet. Patient might not come to know that he has been bitten. Patient might be diabetic, having diabetic neuropathy. So because of that, the pain sensation is gone. Patient might not even come to know he has been bitten. And Mushrifa said ki leptospirosis, alcoholic liver disease, very good. So many patients, if you go to male ward, it is almost full of young adults and elderly people with alcoholic liver disease, jaundice, cirrhosis, and it is bad scene. So alcoholism is like epidemic out here. Leptospirosis definitely is there. So you get to know. Okay. Now, okay, tell me the chief complaint, then I'll come back to this question again.
So the patient presented with the chief complaints of swelling of legs since 1 month and distension of abdomen since 2 weeks.
Okay, so swelling and distension of abdomen. Okay,
Yes, sir.
swelling of legs and distension of abdomen. Okay, so where were we before this?
So the
Leptospirosis, alcoholic liver disease. What
so this is
what else?
prevalent in
What
Andaman.
now you think? What is prevalent in Andaman population? Some genetic disorder. I'm giving you a hint, which can cause swelling of the limbs. Dilated cardiomyopathy in Nicobar patients. Okay, so these things you have to keep in the back of your mind when you're approaching a patient because of the ethnicity. Okay, okay. Now proceed, chief complaint.
So then history of present illness.
No, chief complaints again.
So swelling of legs since 1 month
Mhm.
and distension of abdomen since 2 weeks.
Since 2 weeks. So swelling of the limbs occurred before, and it is for a longer duration. And after that, it started developing swelling of the abdomen. So maybe the patient is having ascites now. Okay. So continue.
The patient was apparently well 1 month back when he developed swelling of both legs, which was gradual in onset,
Mhm.
pitting type, progressive in nature, painless without diurnal variation.
Mhm.
No aggravating or relieving factor was present.
Mhm.
The patient also has complaint of distension of abdomen since 2 weeks,
Mhm.
which was gradual in onset and progressive, and no aggravating and relieving factors.
Mhm. Okay.
There is no history of oliguria or abdominal pain, no history of vomiting or hematemesis, no history of there is a history of one episode of passing black tarry stools 3 days back.
Okay, so this the why didn't you include this black tarry stool in the history chief complaint?
Mm,
The patient didn't complain of this to begin with.
yes, sir.
Okay,
His, com-
so you
his
see,
main
like
complaint.
from exam point of view, see there is a time when you have to let the patient speak. Okay, like we say, you put the history, write the history in patient's wording. So if the patient says, "मुझे चक्कर आ रहा है," you write चक्कर only and talk चक्कर only in the history presentation. You don't say patient is having vertigo, patient is having syncope, or some ataxia. Okay, because that is a personal interpretation. Because chakkar patient might be meaning like he has some feeling, and for you it might be a cardiac arrhythmia. For me, it may be a cervical spondylosis causing giddiness and vertigo. For the third person, it might be some ENT issue, labyrinthitis, that is causing it. Okay, so we have to always put the history in patient's own words and leave it to the examiner to interpret. And but yes, after some time, when you know that patient is just repeating the same thing again and again, then you can ask leading questions. And so like this patient has swelling, so then you can ask leading questions, positive and negative history, so that at the end of the history presentation, before you start the examination, we have an idea like we are dealing with which all system, cardiac, respiratory, or renal, or liver, or combined 2 3 systems are involved, some endocrine, hypothyroid. Okay, so um, can anybody tell me what are the causes of edema? Suman Singh, you have to get into the habit of talking. Yes.
Hello, sir. Good
Yes.
morning, sir.
Good morning. So
Sir,
what are the causes of edema?
causes of edema are nephrotic syndrome, sir.
Okay.
Hypothyroidism.
Mhm.
Then we have in portal hypertension, sir.
Mhm.
And
Okay, you are right. See, these are sporadic answers. So whatever you can recall suddenly, you are saying that is right. But if you have to answer more, you have to you categorize system wise. Let us say what all systems are there in the body which you know of which can cause edema. Muskan, Suman, anybody can switch on the mic and answer. You have to get into the habit of talking because that will help you alleviate your anxiety of talking in the exams.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Sir, uh, edema can be caused by cardiac causes, renal
Cardiac.
causes,
Very good.
Hepatic.
Hepatic.
hepatic causes. Yes, sir.
So heart can there can be cardiac causes of edema, there can be renal causes of edema, there can be liver causing edema. And any other organ which can cause edema? Can lungs cause edema? What is cor pulmonale? Cor pulmonale is right heart failure because of some respiratory condition. Okay, so if the patient has a bad destroyed lung, let us say because of tuberculosis and post TBC sequelae, patient has massive fibrosis and has collapse and the lung tissue is destroyed and a lot of fibrosis is there. So this offers resistance to the incoming blood from the right heart into the lung. Okay, so there is a there is pulmonary artery hypertension develops and that causes back pressure changes, the right atrium will dilate and there can be edema, there can be pleural effusion, there can be ascites, there can be hepatosplenomegaly, there can be pedal edema, the JVP can be raised. Okay, so this way respiratory system can also cause edema. So so Tulsi, can you tell me how the kidneys can cause edema?
Good morning, sir.
Acha, why can't I see everybody in the main screen? Like, how do I see everybody? Because I can just see nine people in the main screen. Anybody can help?
Sir, there is a list of students that have been joined to the meeting.
Okay, I got it. The right side it has come.
Right beside chat box.
ठीक है. Okay. So okay. So anybody wants to tell me how the kidneys can contribute to edema?
Sir, if the amount of albumin or other proteins are decreased in the kidney, then that can lead to edema.
See, the kidney has to retain protein, albumin in the body to filter back. So there will be low protein urine in a normal person. But if there is nephrotic syndrome, glomerulonephritis, some CKD because of diabetes or hypertension, so then they start losing protein in the urine and they develop hypoalbuminemia and that will give rise to edema. And now the question is, next question you will be asked in exam is, how hypoalbuminemia causes edema? Amal and George?
Sir, the albumin determines the oncotic pressure.
Okay, very good. So that is the answer. Okay. So that can cause edema. Any other way there can be edema. One is oncotic pressure. I almost was giving the answer. One is oncotic pressure. Then there is osmotic pressure also. So sodium, it will carry water with it. That is what happens like when you diurize the patient. So patient loses sodium. With sodium, lot of water will diurize. Patient will pass a lot of urine. If the patient takes lot of sodium, there will be water retention that will give rise to hypertension also. So that way kidneys can cause hypoproteinemia, hypoalbuminemia, and hence edema. How about liver? How will liver cause edema? Priyanka?
Decreased protein synthesis.
Liver will do what?
Sir, decreased protein synthesis.
Very good. Okay. So that's the answer. So kidneys are losing proteins, liver is not making albumin. Okay. So that is how edema occurs. Then any other way edema can be there in the body? Any endocrine causes you know of?
Thyroid disorder.
Very good. Hypothyroidism. Okay. So hypothyroidism can cause edema, and it may be non-pitting, and sometimes it can be pitting. So, but there is edema. Okay. So see, now we have some causes of edema, and from here we can start building on. There are many causes, local causes. Okay, cellulitis, DVT, and a lot of other local filariasis. They also can contribute to edema. So usually they will have unilateral edema. They can have bilateral filariasis also, elephantiasis also. But overall, first you have to think about liver, then kidney, then cardiac and respiratory. We missed cardiac. So how heart will cause edema? These basics have to be very, very clear, because if you know how to fish, then I don't have to give you fish to eat every time. Okay, so you should know how to. You should know the basics. Your basics have to be very strong. Akhila, Akanksha, Biswas, Anjali. So please tell, how will heart cause edema? So Mrinal.
Yes, sir.
So how will heart cause edema?
Sir, if the heart doesn't work properly, then there will be a ischemic increase in the
If the heart is not?
pumping properly, sir. If it's a right heart failure, sir.
Very good. This is what I wanted to hear. So if there is a right heart failure, that will
Then
cause
systemic.
edema. So
Yes.
what is the main difference in the presentation of left heart failure and right heart failure?
In left heart failure, pulmonary hypertension will be present. So patient will
Heart
show
failure?
respiratory distress, sir.
Okay.
And in right heart failure, there will be
It's very simple.
edema of the
See, there is a sign and there is a symptom. Edema is what? I have remembered in my mind like this, like there are signboards. So we look at it and then we say, we have to go there. So that is a sign. So edema is there, it is a sign. Okay. Now the patient is breathless. You are not seeing it, but the patient will complain of breathlessness, breathing difficulty, unless the patient is in pulmonary edema. So when there is left heart failure, there will be more of symptoms. In right heart failure, there will be more of signs. The JVP will be raised, there will be pedal edema, there will be hepatosplenomegaly, ascites, gross, anasarca can be there. Okay, so usually it is the right heart failure which causes peripheral edema, and left heart failure can also give rise to right heart failure. It's a long cycle, and back pressure changes, it can cause edema, but per se If you are asked which side of the heart will cause edema, then you say, sir, it is right heart failure. Now remember, interventricular septum is a common wall between left heart and the right heart, left ventricle and the right ventricle. So usually we say left ventricular failure can give rise to right ventricular failure, but the opposite of that is also true. Okay, so right heart failure can also cause left heart failure. How it will cause? Because the interventricular septum is the common wall between left and the right ventricle. So now you imagine the right ventricle is very stretched out, and the interventricular septum is also stretched out, and the right ventricle is usually trigonal in shape. It's triangular in shape. On echo, if you do the echo, you will see the RV as a trigonal structure. But in failure, in dilatation, right ventricular failure, right ventricular dilatation, it becomes rounded. Okay, so it will push the interventricular septum into the left ventricular cavity. So this causes poor contraction of the LV, and that can give rise to left ventricular failure. But usually LV will cause RV failure, and but RV failure can also cause LV failure. Okay, so see, medicine is a vast topic, and that's why clinics are so interesting. It's just a live chat, and the more you answer, the more we can discuss, and the more ideas I will get to teach you. So you have to participate actively, and we can go on for hours, but we will not go on for hours today. We'll just stick to maybe 2 hours. We'll take a break in between. So, Mrinal, can you tell me how you will differentiate cardiac edema from? So let us say there is the neck veins are engorged, okay, and there is edema in the legs also. Maybe the patient has ascites also. So, what are the things that you should be thinking of if you notice a patient with having engorged neck veins?
Sir, if neck veins are engorged, then I should suspect increased JVP, sir.
Okay, JVP can be raised. Okay, good. Deepti,
So,
Deepshika, carry on, Mrinal. Fareen Ahmed, please answer. So you start examining the patient, and you notice that the neck veins are engorged. So what all things should be in your mind so that you can proceed with the questionnaire and examination?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Sir, engorged neck veins could be due to congestive heart failure. Then we'll ask
Congestive heart
about.
failure, they say they use this word, but I find it very confusing because I don't come to know whether we are talking about right heart failure or left heart failure. Because if it is LV failure, it is congestion of the lungs. If it is RV failure, it is peripheral congestion. So I usually avoid congestive cardiac failure as the term. We can just say left heart because
right
of
ventricular failure.
right ventricular failure. See, it makes more sense. Okay, so because of right ventricular failure, there can be engorged neck veins. What else can cause engorged neck veins? We're just trying to beat around edema today. Priyanka? Jatin? Geetika? Anybody can answer?
Good morning, sir. Sir,
Good
it could be
morning.
due to superior vena cava obstruction.
Very good. So I think you have attended my clinics, so you know what I want to hear. But this is a very important thing. You have to, you should be able to distinguish between SVC obstruction and superior mediastinal obstruction and thoracic inlet obstruction or right ventricular failure. Okay, and it's very important. Now, Geetika, can you tell me how you will differentiate?
I don't know, sir.
Okay, so see, if it is right heart failure, the patency between the internal jugular vein and the right ventricle, it is patent. Okay, there is no obstruction at the thoracic inlet level, or SVC obstruction is not there, let us say. So you will see the wave pattern in the JVP. Yes, sometimes the JVP can be so high that it is way up in the cranium. So in that case, you might not see the pulsations, and in that case, after adequate diuretic therapy and other therapies, the patient's JVP might start coming down. Then slowly you will see the JVP at the angle of the jaw. Then slowly it will start coming down. Then you can see the pulsations more clearly. Okay, so that condition can be there. But if it is SVC obstruction, you will not see the wave pattern because the patency is obstructed. So this is a major difference in in SVC obstruction and thoracic inlet obstruction. The face will be cranium face will be very plethoric. The patient might say, डॉक्टर साहब जब मैं बाल कोम करता हूँ मेरा face red हो जाता है, चेहरा red हो जाता है. My face becomes red if when I comb. So that is because there is a cork bottle type of obstruction which develops at the thoracic inlet cavity, and that will happen when you raise your hands up, and both the clavicles, they will approximate together and the diameter decreases. So all the structures going inside from the neck into the thoracic cavity, they get obstructed. So this is called Pemberton sign. So Pemberton sign is when you raise the hands, this obstruction worsens and the face will become plethoric, and if you keep your hands in the standing normal position down, then the redness of the face will become okay. So this will tell you there might be a retrosternal thymus, retrosternal overgrown thyroid, or some lymph node is pressing the structures out there, and something like that. So it is a very important sign. You should always ask about it, and if the patient says yes, my face turns red sometimes, then you evaluate, do Pemberton sign, ask him to raise his hands above the head, keep it for some time, and see if the face goes red or not. So this will help you differentiate between a peripheral disease, some obstruction, or is it right ventricular failure, or some severe tricuspid stenosis, or right atrial myxoma, or severe pericardial tamponade, or a bad COPD, which can cause a rise to raised JVP. Okay, so continue, Mrinal, come back to chief complaint and expand on it. Mrinal?
Yes, sir.
हाँ.
So then there is no history of orthopnea, dyspnea, chest pain, or PND. Then there is no history of puffiness around the eyes or generalized body
Say
swelling.
again, there is no history of chest pain, orthopnea, PND, and dyspnea.
Yes,
So what have you ruled out by asking for these things?
sir. Cardiac causes of edema has been ruled out.
Maybe the patient still might be having a cardiac disease, but overall, like, what is the difference between PND and orthopnea? Which one is more serious? What is PND?
Postural nocturnal dyspnea.
Paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. So it's the definition itself is telling like something happens in the night, which means the patient was able to lie down, sleep, and after some time he had to get up. That is because there is blood in the peripherals in the lower limbs, which once you are flat on the bed, so that blood goes into the systemic circulation. So if your left ventricle is compromised or the right ventricle is compromised, if your left ventricle is compromised, you will become dyspneic, because that there is around 1 liter of blood in your lower limbs. You should always remember it's a life-saving thing. And when you lie flat, this 1 liter suddenly goes into systemic circulation. So you can utilize this funda for treating emergencies also. Supposing you are going on a road and there is an accident and that person has bled a lot, just raise the foot end of the patient, lift his legs up, both the legs up gently, and keep at an angle of 45 degree. and if there is no pulse, his pulse might come back, and because you are pushing around 800 ml to 1 liter of blood into the systemic circulation from the legs. So it's a life-saving procedure, so you should not forget it. Okay, so continue.
Sir, then
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is
We,
no
we were sorry. We were discussing what is more serious, PND is serious or orthopnea is serious. Tulsi.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what is more serious, the uh, PND or orthopnea?
Sir, orthopnea.
Yeah, orthopnea is more serious because orthopnea means you are unable to lie flat. PND is after some time it is happening. So definitely orthopnea is more grievous than PND. Okay. Continue, Brinal.
Sir, then there is no puffiness around the eyes or generalized body swelling.
Okay. So why did you ask about this?
Sir, because in renal causes, the puffiness around the eyes is
Yes,
the first.
Usually in renal causes of edema, the puffiness of there is periorbital puffiness which starts, and then after that the pedal edema occurs. But if the pedal edema is occurring first, and then after few months or years, your eyes are becoming edematous. So then it could be renal also, it could be cardiac also, it could be liver also as the cause. Okay. And in thyroid also you can have some puffiness of the eyes, the lateral side, loss of hair loss can be there, myxedemic look you will get, and there can be edema. Okay, continue.
Then generalized body swelling is to rule out the mixed edema or hypothyroid symptoms.
Okay.
Then there is no complaints of dizziness,
So
tiredness,
okay,
fatigue.
so I'm interrupting you because as and when I'm getting something in my mind to teach, so I will just share the ideas. So in hypothyroidism, what are the things you will look for clinically? Suman?
Yes, sir.
Huh.
So, we will look for different signs of the eyes, like there will be, that is in hypothyroidism. So, we will, uh, there will be increased weight gain, sir,
Weight gain can be there. There can be
and
peridural edema, and
diarrhea.
clinically they may have menstrual abnormality, irregularity, oligomenorrhea can be there, amenorrhea can be there, and mood changes can be there, cold intolerance can be there, and a coarse leathery skin can be there, and in the eyes you can have this thing puffiness of the lateral sides and loss of hair in the lateral side of the upper eyelid, eyebrow. So these things you have to look for. And in the CNS, if you do the knee jerk, you can get a pendular knee jerk. So there are small things you have to keep in mind. Hypothyroidism can also cause pericardial effusion. Hypothyroidism can also cause pleural effusion. So you have to keep these things also in mind when you get even a respiratory case. Supposing you get patient with the pleural effusion, hypothyroidism is one of the causes. Pericardial effusion, hypothyroidism is one of the causes. Okay, so these things are very important. Okay, Mrinal, continue. Someone switch off your mic.
And there is no history of any complaints of dizziness, tiredness, or fatiguability. That is also hypothyroidism, sir.
So hypothyroidism can cause this fatigability, dizziness, and all these things. Any other causes of these non-specific complaints? Fatigue, tiredness, and dysthymia, mildly sad mood. Satish, Abhirami, Tulsi, yes, good. Sony, okay, good. Anemia. Anemia per se can cause all these complaints. Anemia can also cause fever. Okay, so you should include anemia in your one of the causes of fever, and look for it actively when you get a patient with fever. Look for anemia. Okay, in SBE, in subacute bacterial endocarditis, you can get anemia also, and in many other causes, anemia of chronic disease. So there can be a multitude of causes why the patient is anemic. Okay, continue, Mrinan.
So then there is no history of drug intake, no history of any trauma or radiation.
Why did you ask for all these things? Drug intake, trauma, radiation, when your patient has come to you with edema. You have to be ready with all the answers. Whenever you present something, you should be ready for a question, and your answer should be ready. So at every stop, at every thought process in your mind, you should be ready with when, why, what, where, how, edema, why it occurred, when did it occur, why, what are the causes, and how you can alleviate it. So like that, when, why, what, where, how. Keep on asking these questions to yourself, and you will teach yourself. You don't need a teacher actually.
So use of calcium channel blockers and NSAIDs causes pedal edema.
So which calcium channel blocker are you talking about in particular?
So nifedipine, amlodipine.
Very good. Amlodipine and all can cause edema. So when you put your patients on antihypertensive medications and your patient comes to OPD after 2 weeks and says, sir, I am developing this swelling of the lower limbs. So just go through the drugs and make it a habit to think like, did you do something in the previous checkup that is causing this new complaint of the patient? Is something added or subtracted? Have you stopped patient's Lasix and that is why he is developing edema? Or did you add amlodipine? That is why the patient is having pedal edema. So supposing you have added amlodipine and the patient is having pedal edema, then you can change the antihypertensive medication. You can prescribe another class of antihypertensive medication. There are so many. Alpha blockers are there, and beta blockers are there, calcium channel blockers are there, better calcium channel blockers are there, diuretics are there. So many drugs are there. So you don't have to just decrease the dose of that drug and then let the patient's blood pressure rise at the expense of diffusing the edema. So you can give a purified form of amlodipine, which is an S isomer, S amlodipine you can give, and it comes by the name of Stamlo also, and many other companies are making. So that will not cause this peripheral side effects like tachycardia and pedal edema. They will cause less of these things. Okay. We were talking of anemia. So fatigability, lethargy, sadness of mood, edema. So all these things, any other conditions you can think of? See, medicine is very vast. We have to go on tangents, draw a circle. We have to stay in that chief complaints and around the chief complaints. But we have to go off on tangents if you have to pick up the rarest of the diseases also, which might be causing your patients those signs and symptoms. Okay. Okay, so you have to think of adrenal insufficiency also. So these patients with adrenal insufficiency, whenever there is a crisis or adrenal crisis, subclinical Addison's, so whenever there is stress, so these patients will suffer these signs and symptoms, and if not treated with increased dose of corticosteroids, then they will develop adrenal crisis. So first they will present with all these vague complaints: abdominal discomfort, fatigability, body pains, lethargy, malaise, and not feeling like doing anything. You will almost feel tempted to prescribe an anxiolytic and send the patient back. But it is always good to look at the potassium levels, check for hyponatremia, hypernatremia, and do the serum cortisol levels. 8 a.m. sample you can take and 4 p.m. sample you can take. And if the cortisol levels are low, you can do concentropin test or something like that. So Addison's is something which many of the doctors miss because they don't think about it as one of the causes. So if the BP is low, supposing the patient's BP is 90 by 60, 80 by 60, but the patient is looking fine, that patient might be having Addison's. And again, in severe mitral stenosis, the BP will not be high because there is a very tight calcific obstruction at the mitral valve level. So the cardiac output is not enough to maintain a good blood pressure. So if your patient's blood pressure is 90 by 60, 80 by 60, think of Addison's, think of cortisol deficiency, think of severe mitral stenosis or severe aortic stenosis. So this is how you have to approach the patient. And if you keep your hand on the pulse of the patient with severe MS, it will be a very feeble pulse. Likewise for Addisonian patients. And in Addisonian patients, the creases will be hyperpigmented, and the distinction between palmar and the dorsal aspects of the hands, it will be very dark, very bright, and very dark. Okay, so this is how you diagnose Addison's clinically. And if you do the chest X-ray, they will have a tubular heart, very small heart. So if your patient comes with 90 by 60 blood pressure, but the patient's peripheries are warm, don't push in lots of IV fluids, which might do more harm than benefit. Never treat a sign or a symptom. Treat the patient in totality. Okay, so 90 by 60 might be a totally normal BP. If you check my blood pressure, few of you know I'm into sports medicine and into sports and marathon running and all. So if you check my BP, it is always 100 by 60, 98 by 60. And I was a diabetic at one time. My sugar was 113 and my triglycerides was 600. Cholesterol was 450. My weight was 104 kilos. And now my BP is 90 by 60 and I can run 42 kilometers. And you check my sugar, it is 88, 89, 90, almost hypoglycemic. But I'm totally fine because I practice intermittent fasting and a modified form of keto diet. Okay, so my body is not dependent on sugar. So even if my sugars go very low, I will not become unconscious. So that is the beauty of keto diet or intermittent fasting. Your body adapts to use the fats for energy. Like right now also I'm fasting, and all of you must have had breakfast, nice parathas, people must have had, or puris, whatever you get. But if you fast for 16 hours a day, and you will get awesome results. The focus, your concentration, and your ability to reach to better, finer answers. You will notice so much of differences there. Your thinking becomes very sharp. Your mood is elated just for nothing. And you will be feeling like pursuing your passions, like dance, music, YouTubing, studies, and athletics. So you just try it, and if you want more guidance, you can contact me on WhatsApp. I'll help you. My videos are there also on YouTube about intermittent fasting and how it is helpful. So we are again going astray. So Mrinal, please come back. Continue.
Sir, then there is no history of any fever, weight loss, or night sweats. Just to rule out tuberculosis, sir. Then there is no history of vomiting, constipation, or abdominal pain.
So if you're suspecting tuberculosis, so what all things you will ask to your patient? Pavitra, Prashant, Pratisha, please answer.
Sir, cough more than 2 weeks, fever more than 2 weeks, evening rise of temperature, night sweat, chills, rigors.
Chills, rigors you will not get in tuberculosis. So usually TB patients, they will have low-grade fever. They may not have any symptom at all. Okay, see, now again you had a sort of a tunnel vision and a brain block when you were asked this question suddenly. Okay, you tell me the causes of what all things you will ask to a patient in whom you're suspecting tuberculosis. Now, see, your mind told you that TB means it is in the lungs. Okay, it is not so. TB can affect any cell of the body. From head to toe, TB can affect anywhere. In the brain, you can get tuberculomas, focal lesions, you can get tuberculomas, you can get meningitis, you can get arteritis, cerebritis, cerebellitis, arachnoiditis, okay, myelitis. All these things tuberculosis can cause. Vasculitis, TB can cause vasculitis. Okay, in the eyes, uveitis, retinitis, TB can cause. And you pick up any structure, you keep on adding itis, TB can cause that. In the heart, myocarditis, papillitis, valvulitis, pericarditis, pericardial tubercular effusion, it is so common. In the lungs, there are 101 ways TB can affect. Okay, TBC of the bronchus. Okay, and in the lung tissue there can be TB, there can be cavity, there can be fibrosis, there can be collapse, and in the outside the lungs there can be pleural effusion, pneumothorax, TB can cause. Then come outside that, there can be osteomyelitis in the ribs. Okay, go to the abdomen, hepatitis, acute tubercular hepatitis. TB can also cause acute tubercular pneumonias. Okay, then ileocecal TB. Sometimes you will get ultrasound report of your patient, it will show thickening of the ileocecal junction. So you should always think of tuberculosis. There can be para-aortic nodes, there can be mediastinal lymphadenopathy, and in the uterus there can be tuberculosis and oophorytis it can cause, and amenorrhea because of tuberculosis it can happen, and in the adrenals TB can affect and cause Addison's. It's one of the commonest causes of causing Addison's, osteomyelitis. So every structure can be affected by TB. So when you are asked, so you can just say, sir, in respiratory tuberculosis, I will ask for these complaints, but I will also look for draining sinuses and non-healing wounds, fistulas in the neck and perianal fistulas, and non-healing ulcers. So like that. So see, now suddenly, and visual symptoms, pain in the eyes, blurring of vision, and photophobia. So many things TB can cause. Weight loss. So when you're talking of weight loss, you have to think about malignancies also. Anorexia nervosa I have to keep in mind. And anything else that can cause weight loss. Okay, drug abuse or the patient is a fitness freak. Okay, you must have seen these Kenyan runners, Ethiopian runners. They are so they look almost emaciated. They are so low weight, but they finish 42 kilometers in 2 hours and 2 minutes. They are awesome. They are like so ultra fit, but they look very weak. So it's like that. Continue, Brennan.
Sir, then there is no history of vomiting, constipation, or abdominal pain.
Continue.
Sir, then there is no history of any vomiting, constipation, or abdominal pain, sir. To rule out any GI causes like hepatitis.
Okay.
Then past history, sir. There is no any similar complaints in the past. No history of diabetes, hypertension, TB, jaundice, or blood transfusion. There is no medical or surgical history, sir. Past surgical. In personal history, he consumed sleep normal. There is a history of alcoholism. He consumes 3 kegs of whiskey per day since last 25 years.
Okay.
He is a non-smoker and has no allergy to any allergens.
I think Mrinal will just take 2 minutes break and we'll be back.
Okay.
Okay. Hello. Mrinal, you are there?
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of background noise, Mrinal.
Yes, sir. Sir, lastly, personal history, sir.
So in personal history, what all things you will ask? Every part of the history taking is important.
Sir, I asked for his diet. He has a mixed diet. The sleep, appetite, bowel bladder habits are normal, sir. And he's a chronic alcoholic, sir.
See, one is alcoholism, so it can cause pedal edema, hypoalbuminemia and pedal edema. Now, see, he is abusing one drug, not drug. Alcohol is not a drug. He is abusing alcohol, and in such a patient, you should also ask for history of IV drug abuse. And why is that important? Because if the patient is taking intravenous drugs, so he is injecting some morphine, fortwin, or heroin or something. So then they will not use proper aseptic techniques eventually, and they will develop infective endocarditis. So usually in IV drug abuse, the tricuspid regurgitation starts first. The tricuspid valve gets affected first. Okay, so then that will start causing right heart failure. So then they will develop edema. So see, everything in the history taking is important. So even if it is not making sense at that time, you just ask, and later on maybe after some time you might feel, this can cause this and this can cause this. Continue.
Yes, sir. Then he consumes 3 pegs of whiskey per day for last 25 years.
Okay.
He does not smoke and has no allergy to any allergens.
Okay. So what is the difference in the behavior pattern of people who abuse opioids, morphine, heroin, Fortwin, IV, and people who take alcohol? I have worked in psychiatry also. Before I did MD medicine, I worked in psychiatry for 6 months, and it was an eye-opening experience for me. I feel everybody should be posted in psychiatry. Then you can come to know about the mind. Alcoholics, they will usually not like to have too much of tea. This is what we noted. Okay, so they will take alcohol only. And people who take opioids, they will not drink, and they like a lot of tea and all. Likewise, cannabis, tetrahydrocannabinol, hashish, ganja, charas. So these are different forms and different names which people mix with cigarette and have it. So they also will, when they are high, they will want to have a lot of tea, a lot of sweet things. So clinically you can come to know, and they will be like hyper alert. They'll be moving their heads and eyes in jerks. So you'll come to know this is not alcohol. Or an alcoholic, if he's having delirium tremors, then they may have this type of behavior, sudden jerky movements. And so these are the things you have to keep in mind and note. Continue.
So then family history. There is no significant family history. Then general examination.
Okay.
The patient is conscious, cooperative, and well oriented to time, place, and person.
Just come to family history. In family history, what did you ask? Like, what are the things you have to take care? Keep in mind, this patient in whom you're suspecting alcoholic liver disease, this patient might be having cirrhosis. Okay, so cirrhosis, there might be another reason of cirrhosis. So you heard of Wilson's disease?
Yes, sir.
So family history is very important. Okay, does anybody in the family have cirrhosis, and do they have jaundice, and if you're suspecting Wilson's? Continue.
General examination. The patient is conscious, cooperative, and well oriented to time, place, and person. In head to toe examination.
So when you say patient is conscious, so always introduce the patient first to the teacher. Okay, so you can say, sir, the patient is so and so, a middle-aged or elderly lady or gentleman, and pleasant in personality, cooperative, and maintaining a healthy eye contact. So this will and lying comfortably in bed. Or if the patient has a nasogastric tube or has an IV site, IV cannula, or has urinary catheter, so you can mention that also. So this will roughly tell me the patient's condition. Okay, so if you tell me, sir, the patient is connected to oxygen and or a BiPAP machine or a CPAP machine, or the patient is connected to ventilator, I will know patient is very serious. Okay, so that is very important. If the patient is maintaining a healthy eye contact, see, looking at the other person up to some seconds is considered normal. But if you keep on staring at the other person, it becomes abnormal. So if the patient is psychotic, so they may challenge you through their eyes, and they may even attack you. So you have to be very cautious if the patient is just keeping on looking at you. So they may be psychotic. A depressed person, he will avoid the eye contact. He'll be looking away from you. So, and more so seen in females, they will look away males, they will try to establish eye contact. So eye contact is very important because you can come to know whether the patient is in psychosis or patient is depressed or the patient is malingering. And psychosis can be because of some drug abuse, or it could be a severe psychotic disorder, bipolar disorder patient might be having, or if the patient is avoiding eye contact, so severe dysthymia is there. Maybe there is another bad psychiatric disorder like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. In that, these patients can present. And there are something called as rapid cyclers. So in the morning, if you go on rounds, you will see the patient is in psychosis, throwing things at you and abusing loudly. In the evening, you go for rounds, they're crying. They're in severe depression. So they are called rapid cyclers. And it's very difficult to treat such patients. Okay. So you have to introduce the patient in one line, and then you start whatever you want to say. Continue.
So then head to toe examination.
Mm-hmm.
There is no dysmorphic faces.
Mm-hmm.
Head is normal.
Mm-hmm.
In eyes, pallor and icterus is present.
Okay.
And KF ring is absent.
Mm-hmm.
In mouth is normal. There is bilateral parotid enlargement.
Mm-hmm.
Neck, no lymphadenopathy.
So bilateral parotid enlargement, what does it mean? What is the significance?
So it can indicate towards infection of mumps, or it is enlarged in cirrhosis, cases of cirrhosis.
Okay, good.
So then in nails, grade 2 clubbing is present, but there is no sign of cyanosis.
Okay.
In chest, gynecomastia is present. Back and spine is normal.
So anybody can tell me peripheral signs of liver cell failure? Neha? Saurav Ghoshal? Suman? Tulsi says gynecomastia. Saurav?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Sir, there can be parotid swelling.
Parotid swelling.
There can be ascites, testicular dystrophy.
Atrophy.
Yeah, sir, atrophy, sir. And sir, there can be clubbing.
Somebody says palmar erythema. Palmar erythema, fetor hepaticus, spider nevi, dupuytren's contracture. So there are so many peripheral signs of liver cell failure. So you have to keep in mind, and if you detect some sign, you look for the other signs also. Okay, continue. Mrinal?
Sure. Then lower limb bilateral pitting type of pedal edema. Joints are normal and skin is normal.
So if there is an IV line going in both the lower limbs, so how you will look for edema, peripheral edema? Anybody? Saurav, Soni, Monmozi?
So in sacrum.
Very good. Okay, so it is a dependent area posteriorly. So the sacrum, if there is sacral edema, you can just say, sir, there is peripheral edema. Okay, good. Continue.
So vitals of the patient. The pulse rate is 80 beats per minute, regular. Then respiratory rate is 18 breaths per minute. BP is 110 by 80 mm of Hg. And temperature is afebrile on touch. Then systemic examination. Then examination of abdomen.
We'll just focus on abdomen today.
In inspection, abdomen is distended, tense. Distended veins seen radiating from umbilicus can be seen. no scar or sinus.
Okay.
No visible.
In a way, we are ruling out tuberculosis, sinuses, scars.
Yes, sir. Then palpation. The abdomen is soft, non-tender, spleen palpable, 8 centimeter below
You have to first inspect, then you have to do the superficial palpation, then deep palpation, okay, then percussion, auscultation. So these are steps. So on inspection, what all things you will look for?
Sir, we'll see the shape of the abdomen. Then any visible way.
What are the different shapes you know of the abdomen?
Sir, it can be scaphoid, distended, flanks are full.
Okay, so one is shape of the abdomen, then so distension can be because of fluid. There can be ascites, there can be peritoneum. Such a patient will be in shock, and there can be just fat, truncal obesity, and or the patient might be pregnant, or patient might be having a tumor, big tumor, or there can be massively enlarged spleen occupying whole of the abdomen almost. So how you will differentiate between these different conditions? How you will differentiate ascites from pregnancy, swelling because of pregnancy?
On inspection, sir.
Inspection, palpation, percussion.
Linea alba and linea nigra based on.
Many patient is actively pregnant. Patient has 8 months gestation, and there is swelling of the abdomen, which is because of the fetus. So how you will say this patient has ascites and this patient is pregnant, supposing you don't know the history? So if it is pregnancy, the umbilical, periumbilical area will be dull, okay, on percussion, and the peripheries, the flanks might be resonant because the fetus is right in the center, there is amniotic fluid. But if there is ascites, if it is not very tense ascites, the periumbilical area, there might be a tympanic node, and as you keep on going peripherally towards the flanks, it may become dull node because at the level of the fluid, ascites. So likewise spleen, so always start a palpation from the right iliac fossa. For spleen you have to go diagonally like we have taught you and look for the splenic notch, the firmness, okay, and if it is a mass, then it is a different way of palpation. We have told you how to palpate. So these are different causes, these are different things you have to keep in mind when you approach and do the examination of the abdomen. Okay, continue.
Sir, on superficial palpation, it is the abdomen is soft, non-tender. Spleen is palpable 8 centimeter below the left costal margin.
In superficial palpation, you will not talk about spleen. Okay, you have to tell me about the temperature of the skin, any local tenderness on mild, gentle palpation. When we say mild, gentle palpation, superficial palpation, we mean that if you press even 1 millimeter more, the fold of the cloth will wrinkle, or the fold might go away. So that gentle you have to be, because sometimes you will hear hepatic bruise in hepatocellular carcinoma or hemangiomas, big bruise you can hear. You will feel the bruise, okay, over the liver area. So this bruise you will feel only on superficial palpation, and if you apply slightly more pressure, that bruise will vanish. So that you have to be very, very gentle, and you have to always proceed with superficial palpation if the patient is having marked pain. So then it won't be wise to do an aggressive deep palpation. You can go for ultrasonography and see, and patient might be having impending rupture of aortic aneurysm, something like that, or very marked tender burst appendix, and there is pyoperitoneum, and there's a lot of guarding rigidity. So superficial palpation, look for any abnormal bulges, any abnormal pulsations. So pulsations is very important. there are different types of pulsations you will see in the abdomen, especially in the thin person. You will be able to appreciate, and you can determine the level of obstruction. So supposing the pulsation is, patient says when he swallows water and he feels the pulsations in the upper abdomen, so that is the ileum jejunum area. Okay, so that is upper GIT obstruction. So if there is peristalsis, massive peristalsis, such that it is visible, and if the pulsations are going in the right side from below upwards, so there is obstruction in the transverse colon, or maybe at the splenic flexure there is an obstruction. And if it is periumbilical pulsations, probably it is a large intestine obstruction. And sometimes the patient will give history of vomiting. And some patients with lower intestinal obstructions, I have seen one patient and it was really bad obstruction before surgery. He was passing stools in the vomitus, and we felt like vomiting, like I can imagine the condition of the patient, what he must be feeling. So such bad was the obstruction. So he was passing stools in the vomitus, bad smelling stools. So everything is very important in the history and examination. Continue.
So in deep pulsation, previous palpable 8 centimeter below the left coastal margin by dipping method. Then liver is not palpable. And in bimanual aspiration of kidney is not palpable.
Okay.
Then percussion, shifting dullness is present, and fluid tail is present.
Okay.
Then auscultation, sir. Peristaltic movements are heard around the umbilicus.
Okay. So if your patient has ascites, and supposing you have a patient in OPD whom you are seeing regularly, maybe twice a month or something, and this patient was treated, you put him on spironolactone and other beta blockers and other things, and his ascites resolved, and again he came with ascites. You have to rule out subacute bacterial peritonitis, SBP. So it is recommended that every time these patients come, you have to do ascitic tap and send for analysis. Look for protein, sugars, cultures, you do counts, you check ADA. Okay, so this is something you have to keep in mind for your OPD patients. But if the patient is fine and the patient has ascites, every time he comes for a ascitic tap, every month or something he comes for a ascitic tap to drain the fluid, then it is fine. You don't have to send it for analysis every time. Okay, continue.
So then examination of other systems.
Is it normal?
Serious normal H1 and H2 sound heard, no added sound. In respiratory system,
so normal. You have to at least say this much: S1, S2 is normal. No S3, S4 heard. If it's like that, no adventitious sounds heard. No pericardial rub heard. No murmurs. Okay. In the respiratory system.
Respiratory system, bilateral ventricular dead sounds are heard. CNS.
So no Krebs or Ronchi heard.
Then CNS, patient is well oriented to time, place, and person.
Okay, so sum up the history and examination and tell me what a diagnosis, differential diagnosis is, and what a diagnosis is.
Sir, it's a 50-year-old male with the complaints of bilateral leg swelling and abdominal distension, with one episode of passing of black stool. If the patient of he is chronic alcohol consumer with pallor, distress, and grapefruit clubbing, uh, then periumbilical veins are detected,
Mhm.
and sphenomegaly is present, and it's the most probably case of alcoholic liver disease, increased total hypertension.
Mhm. Okay. So, how you will treat such a patient?
It's alcoholic liver disease, so I would like to do investigation. At what stage the patient is?
So, what all investigations you want to do?
Sir, I would like to do liver function test.
Mhm. Always start with
The
the basic investigations because you will get a lot of clues. Okay. Now, see CBC, complete blood count, CBC, RFT, electrolytes, LFT, PT-INR, blood culture, urine culture. These are sort of the basic tests: ultrasound, abdomen, ECG, echo. These are basic tests, total protein albumin. So then you will get the picture of where your patient stands. Now, why CBC is important is because supposing this patient comes with anemia, then you have to think of any intraperitoneal, intra-abdominal bleed. Okay, there is an abdominal distension, and liver disease patient it is, and he might have he will be having a deranged PT-INR, deranged LFT, and he might have bled. So this patient might have come to you in shock also. So HB will give you some indication. And supposing this patient is having slow oozing of blood in the GIT, some ulcer he is bleeding from, or otherwise is bleeding in the GIT because of helminthiasis and all. His reticulocyte count might be slightly raised. Okay. And retics usually they will rise if it is acute blood loss. And if you are giving therapy, then your retics should start rising by third day. After 2 to 3 days of therapy, your retics will start rising, provided your bone marrow is okay. So this is important. So HB you have to see the TLC. Is there infection? Are the lymphocytes more or neutrophils are more? And are there any eosinophils, any allergic uh, entities there in the body? Is there eosinophilia? And platelets you have to see. You can get thrombocytopenia. Usually you will get thrombocytopenia because these patients, they will not be eating healthy diets, so they will have B12 deficiency also. So one of the things, like if your patient comes with anemia and his platelets are low, you have to think of B12 deficiency. And most of the times you will be right in your diagnosis. If there is thrombocytopenia and anemia, you will have a macrocytic picture, and megaloblast you will see, megaloblast you will see, and B12 deficiency will be there. The B12 levels, if you check, they will be less than 200. And sometimes if your B12 levels are, let us say some labs cutoff value is from 200 to 2000, okay, micrograms per liter B12 levels. And the patient's B12 levels are 230. And studies have shown these patients also actually have B12 deficiency. You should supplement it with B12. So intramuscular or IV B12 you can give, because orally anyway patient is not absorbing B12. There can be intrinsic factor antibodies, or the diet is deficient, or it is not deficient, patient is not absorbing. There is celiac disease, or irritable bowel syndrome, or Crohn's, or ulcerative, and absorption is not good. Celiac disease. So then you have to give IV or IM B12 therapy. And iron, if it is a microcytic hypochromic picture, and in B12 it will be macrocytic. MCV will be more than 100. In iron deficiency it will be less than 88. 80 to 100 is normal range. Okay, continue. Treatment. So see, these patients can come to you with bleeding complaints. They may come with melena. This patient came with melena. So you have to take a surgical opinion, see any bleeding piles are there. If it is there, you correct it. And hemorrhoidectomy can be done, cryosurgery can be done, or direct visual surgery can be done, and the bleeding will stop. If the PT-INR is deranged, you give fresh frozen plasma. You can give vitamin K, 20 mg stat, 10 mg OD into 3 days, and reevaluate your patient again. If still the bleeding doesn't stop, you can try cryoresuscitates also. Then ascites. So for ascites, you have to supplement with albumin. Okay, so you can give 100 ml of 10% albumin. Once a day, slow IV infusion over maybe 6 to 7 hours. And it is always a good idea to give albumin and FFPs before doing ascitic tap in chronic liver disease patients. Then antibiotics. So you can give metronidazole flagyl. So you can give 500 milligrams 8 hourly, and with that you can add cephalosporin. Ceftriaxone is a good drug, and ceftriaxone 1 gram BD you can give IV. And why I prefer ceftriaxone is because it has a dual mode of excretion from the liver as well as the kidneys. So if one of the organs is compromised, the patient will not suffer from toxicity, but he will get a good effect, antibiotic effect. Okay. Then rest of the therapy is symptomatic. Don't give too much of IV fluids. If they are bleeding, you have to do endoscopy and evaluate the patient. If there are esophageal varices, you have to do banding, and so it depends on what you come across and then you treat. Then in medical therapy, you can give terlipressin 1 mg 8 hourly IV infusion. You can give beta blockers. Beta blockers are the only drug which prevents variceal bleeds. So it's more of a empiric drug therapy. Once the bleeding happens, then you have to definitely go for surgical options. Then if ascites is there, you can give spironolactone, and lactone you can give, and that will help in decreasing the ascites. Okay. And then restrict the IV fluids, restrict the sodium intake, and little bit of proteins patient has to take. 60 to 80 grams proteins per day he has to take, because he will be losing, because he doesn't have proteins in the, because of the liver disease. So we have covered edema, we have covered bleeding, and ascites we have covered, infections we have covered. Then any other complaints that the patient develops, you have to address that then and there. Supposing the patient starts having seizures, you have to think of IC bleed, intraventricular bleed, or a subdural hematoma, waxing and waning consciousness. So you have to treat accordingly. These patients can go into hepatorenal syndrome. Look, keep a check on the creatinine, urea, and a low urea, very, very low urea is also not a good sign, because urea is formed from protein metabolism. Okay, it is an end product. And where will that happen? It will happen in the liver. So supposing your patient's urea is 4, don't feel very happy. Don't think that his kidneys are functioning optimally. And actually the liver is failing. The liver is very, very bad. The liver is not at all helping in the protein synthesis, protein metabolism. And that is why the urea is low. Okay. So like that you have to think. So be very guarded if the urea is 3, 4, 5 like that in a blood test. Don't say it is a lab error if your patient is a cirrhotic. So that is a bad prognostic sign. So there can be hepatorenal syndrome, hepatopulmonary syndrome, IC bleeds they can have. So there are a lot of things these patients can present to you with. So you have to treat appropriately as and when according to the complaints. So I think we'll stop here today. So it was a good discussion. Mainly I was talking, you people were quiet. So thank you all for joining, and I'll cut parts of this lecture and I will upload on my site and Health Music Fitness, and all of you can subscribe and follow up. You will come back and listen to these discussions. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.